Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Saleemul, Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, and Professor at the Independent University, Bangladesh, IUB. With almost 400 scientific publications and far above 30,000 citations, you're not only one of the most prominent scientists of Bangladesh, but also one of the strongest voices of the Global South on climate mitigation, adaptation, and justice. Professor Haq, we look forward to hearing your perspectives on environmental change, sustainable business, and the textile industry in your native country, Bangladesh. For a first set of questions, I'm happy to pass you on to my colleague, Professor Daniel Karthe. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Edel. And it's also a great pleasure for me to have you here with us today, Professor Haq. And I would now ask you two questions related to climate and environmental change. Professor Haq, as you are one of the most prominent climate scientists from South Asia, not only Bangladesh, and as you have been a key contributor to the work of the IPCC for many years, what would you say are the specific threats of climate change to Bangladesh, and what makes Bangladesh more vulnerable than many other countries?
Well, there are three factors that make Bangladesh particularly vulnerable. The first one is geography. We are a country located on the delta of two of the biggest rivers in the world, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra. Almost the entire country is the delta of these two big rivers, which start from the Himalayas mountains and then come all the way to the Bay of Bengal through Bangladesh. The second is the population size with respect to the size of the country. We have well over 170 million people living in a country whose total size is less than 150,000 square kilometers. That gives us, the whole country, a population density of well over 1,000, which you only see in city-states like Hong Kong and Singapore, but not in a whole country like Bangladesh. And thirdly, we are a relatively poor country. We are improving our poverty, but we still have a large number of poor people, and the impacts of climate change, whether they be floods or they be heavy rainfalls or they be cyclones or droughts, mostly affect the poorest people in the country. So poor people are almost always the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In fact, right now, as we are speaking, the port city, the second biggest city of Bangladesh, Chittagong, is inundated. They had 400 millimeters of rainfall in the last 4 or 5 days. The entire city is underwater. It's a big city, and it is all underwater. And this is unprecedented rainfall, just very short rainfall. The water will drain out fairly soon, but it is causing a lot of havoc at the moment. And in fact, unfortunately, it's also led to a number of deaths from landslides because there are some hills in that region which got eroded and people died as a result. So Bangladesh happens to be one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, which is well recognized globally.
Thank you very much also for highlighting that this is a problem that exists not only as a general trend, but that it is happening right now, as you mentioned, the flooding in the city of Chittagong. So when looking at the increasing challenges of climate change, but also other environmental changes affecting Bangladesh, how do you think can environmental action in your country help in mitigating these challenges? And how do you envision your country's transition to becoming more resilient to climate change and other environmental changes?
So Bangladesh, as I mentioned already, is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. That is not a new fact. That we have known for the last 10 years. And we have not been sitting idle. We have been doing quite a lot of analysis to find out which places are the most vulnerable to different kinds of impacts, floods, droughts, cyclones. which communities, which parts of the community, as I said, poor people in general, much more vulnerable than rich people, women more vulnerable than men, children more vulnerable than adults, elderly more vulnerable than normal people, etc., etc. And so we have done quite a lot of analysis, and we have also developed our own plans to adapt to those impacts of climate change. And Bangladesh is actually one of the world leaders in adaptation to climate change, particularly, I would say, in adapting to the impacts of cyclonic storms, which we get in the coastal zone of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is one of the most effective warning and evacuation and shelter program in the coastal zone of Bangladesh, where we get cyclones regularly. The cyclones are not caused by climate change, but they become more intense because of climate change when the sea surface temperature is higher than normal, when the atmospheric temperature is higher than normal. And so we have got a lot of experience in coping with the impacts, minimizing the loss of human lives from those climate impacts. But nevertheless, they still come and they still do a lot of damage, and we need to cope with them. So our planners and our decision makers are investing quite heavily in enhancing our adaptive capacity and improving our environmental preservation, conservation, not destroying our forests and wetlands, but preserving them and conserving them. This is now a growing area of decision and doing. Unfortunately, in the past, we have actually done quite a lot of development by destroying the environment. We have cut down forests, we have built over wetlands, but we realize that has been the wrong thing to do. We've stopped doing it now, and we are trying to reverse the trend.
Thank you very much. I think it is very encouraging to hear that even though in the past there have been destructions of the environment, you mentioned Bangladesh's vulnerability when it comes to climate change and the geographic factors contributing to that. But it's very encouraging to hear that the country has learned the lessons and that you now consider Bangladesh to be a leader in the context of climate adaptation, and that the protection of the environment is something that is taken very seriously. And with that, I would hand you over to Professor Günther, who would ask the next questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. As outlined in the beginning, we have 3 topics we want to discuss with you: environmental and climate change, sustainable business, and the textile industry. So now, as we have already discussed climate change, environmental change, we will move on to the topic of sustainable business. Bangladesh is lauded to have the highest number of green factories in the world, yet there are many factories in the country that are still non-green. My question is, how can we support the non-green factories in Bangladesh effectively to prevent further environmental damage and promote climate and also biodiversity justice, speaking of the triple planetary crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution?
That's an excellent question, and you're quite right. You know, the number of green factories, garment factories in Bangladesh, I think as of day before yesterday, passed 200. So there are more than 200 green factories, and becoming a green factory for an owner of the factory is a considerable amount of cost involved. They have to get LEED certification. They have to do a lot of investments to make themselves green. But on the other hand, when they sell their products, their garments, they don't get a single cent or euro extra for being a green factory. They have to compete with the non-green factories. So as you said, there are thousands of non-green factories, but 200 green factories. So these 200 are pioneers. They are willing to invest in doing the right thing and improving the conditions of their environmental use, and also looking after the workers better. So it's both a social as well as environmental a factor involved in this. Many of the others don't do this. And really the best way to get them to do it is give them an incentive. If there's €1 extra per shirt that can be charged to the customer in Europe, then other factories will do it. But right now, they don't give. They give €0 extra per shirt to the green factories. And the green factories are investing in making themselves green anyway, because they think it's the right thing to do, because they are actually very smart business people.
Thank you very much, and also for your thoughts how to incentivize becoming a green factory. If I'm informed correctly, this would make the 200 factories would make about 5% of all factories in Bangladesh. So not a lot, but still a good start. And as you said, the number is rising, and I think also questioning how we can include the Global North in the funding of those green factories. Like you said, the buildings must have a certificate for an environmentally friendly building and so on. I think there are many further areas to be developed. So thank you very much. I have a second question regarding sustainable business. When it comes to climate justice and environmentally friendly business practices, a lot of experts and academics talk about the idea of changing mindsets. And actually, you already alluded to that by talking about the willingness to pay. What are your thoughts on this? How can we actually make this mindset shift happen and get people on board with sustainable practices if they are a company, with sustainable consumption if they are a consumer, and with sustainability in politics if they are politicians?
That's an excellent question. And I think, and actually, I believe a very, very big opportunity bilaterally between Bangladesh and Germany, because we have some very good relations. Germany has been a very good friend and supporter of Bangladesh. The German government has been supporting development activities as well as environment activities and climate change as well. And they're now, I believe, planning the next phase of their development cooperation. So now is a good time to come up with ways in which we can collaborate more effectively going forward. And the way that I would promote and I would support is to think of it as a two-way street, not just German support to Bangladesh, that's part of it, but also raising the awareness of German consumers of the products that is coming from Bangladesh and getting them to be willing to pay the extra euro for the environment-friendly product from Bangladesh. As I said, the Bangladeshi green factory owners are quite willing to invest in making their product green, but the green product does not get an extra premium in the market from consumers. Can we do that? Can we promote green products in the German market, particularly young people? Young people, you know, they are ones who are aware of climate change. We can convince them that this is something that they should promote and support. They'd be willing to do that. It's a marginal cost extra to pay for it. But it will have a major effect in terms of persuading the companies, the non-green companies, to become green, because they are all businesses. They look for profits. If they can make more money, they'll do it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I also think that your metaphor of a street that really has two directions is a wonderful possibility also to communicate also the next steps. Thank you very much. So now we will move to the third part, the specific questions regarding the textile industry. Again, it's already too related to some of your previous answers. How can the business sectors, and here the textile industry, be reimagined to contribute to such an economy of the future, if we call it economy of the future, that protects people, their livelihoods, and the environment? So the triple bottom line.
That's something that I feel in Bangladesh is beginning to happen. As I mentioned, you know, the 200 factory owners who became green did not do it for economic incentive. They did it because it was the right thing to do. And they were willing to invest in it. They put their money into making it happen. They are very enlightened entrepreneurs and business people. We need them to spread this message to everybody else. And we need the investing community, the bankers and the the investors in these industries to also play a role to make sure that the industries become greener, both in terms of protecting the environment, but also in terms of social aspects of looking after their workers better, paying better, giving good conditions to the workers. This is something that in Bangladesh is beginning to happen. Still not there, still thousands of factories giving poor wages, not looking at the environment, just making money. But we can, over time, we can certainly get them to improve. And if they don't improve, to get them to stop. You know, we don't want them to continue exploiting workers and destroying the environment. If they continue to do that, they should be stopped. The good news is this is now something that the government accepts, many of the industry leaders accept, but it's still not happening at the scale that it needs to happen. And so the challenge for us going forward is how do we scale it up quickly and make it happen both with a incentive, as I mentioned, giving them a price incentive in terms of sales, but also in terms of regulation. The government is quite willing to do that, but they don't want to close down the factories. They want to give them an incentive to improve and do better. And we are in a good policy space there because the government is quite interested in doing that. And they would welcome technical assistance from Germany and from other countries to be able to do that. So this is an opportunity for us to rethink the business paradigm that we have been. Bangladesh has been selling itself as a cheap labor place. That's everything is just cheap. We just cheap. We do everything with bad conditions and destroying the environment, but we are cheap. We've done that. We became very successful at that. We cannot do that anymore. And we realize that. We understand that we cannot just be the cheapest in the market anymore. We have to add value. We have to be better at preserving the environment and helping workers. And we need to be able to get a premium, some level of recognition that this is something worth doing from buyers, from international partners like Germany. And that's something that I think is a good way to take this conversation forward and to explore ways in which we can make it happen more quickly. It's happening, but we need to make it happen much more quickly.
Yeah, and I think by rethinking or making people rethink what cheap really means, what you said, yeah, the price might be low, but in the end, we pollute the environment. We threaten the health of the workers. They cannot pay schools for their kids because the kids have to work and so on. This is really something that can be discussed worldwide. What is cheap really good? No, it's not. It's bad. And there, I think this is.
You're quite right. And you know, in Bangladesh in general, there is a very strong realization that cheap is not the best way to go. Even the consumers here and the decision makers and the general public, they realize that just being cheap and destroying the environment and trampling on workers' rights is not a good way to develop. It's not good for the country. And we don't want that to happen anymore. So there is a very strong general feeling amongst the citizens, including local consumers, that we must change. And that is now being reflected in the industry itself. Some of them, as I said, they are moving in the right direction. We need to make that happen to many, many more of them who are yet to move in that direction.
Thank you. And I think, Daniel, you have another question that might be connected to the deliberations.
Yes, the last question, which is very highly connected to what we already spoke about. Let's now link Bangladesh and Germany, as Germany is one of the top export destinations for textiles from Bangladesh. You have mentioned already that paying a higher price for green products could be a good incentive for businesses in Bangladesh, and maybe that regulations in countries like Germany or regions like the EU could help sustainable businesses in Bangladesh to increase their market shares. Beyond that, what do you think, what kind of collaborations are needed between producing countries like Bangladesh and consuming countries like Germany to effectively support the transition to climate and environment-friendly industrial practices?
I feel we need to invest more in people-to-people exchanges. You know, this is just at the government-to-government level at the moment, and the exporter to the importer. These are just companies at the moment. But if we can do beyond the companies to the consumers themselves, and young people in particular, I emphasize young people as a very important cohort of the consuming public in Germany. You know, your students in your university, can we get your students and my students to talk to each other and come up with innovative ways to collaborate and support each other to carry out these new ways of working, and finding ways to give a premium product price to those that are being innovative and being green. That would go a long way. Once you start showing a profitability in doing the right thing, then all the other industries will follow suit, because they also like profit. But we have to show that with some examples. And I think if we put our heads together, I would certainly be interested in exploring with you how university to university we can do some better research. We can involve our students in doing some activities together, and just seeing whether we can improve the understanding of this issue in the general public, in both countries, so that we are better prepared, better understand the issues, and are looking to work together going forward.
Thank you so much, Professor Haq, for sharing your time and insights on environmental challenges in Bangladesh, the role of sustainable business practices and how to mitigate them, and also the textile industry. You mentioned people-to-people exchange. You mentioned the role of students, and I like your idea a lot of university-university exchange. 15 years ago, or even longer, I developed a class investing in a sustainable future together with a colleague at University of Virginia, because I was based there at that time, where we also made students collaborate. And I think that's something we could really accomplish together. I like that a lot, and we will follow up.
So, I would love to follow up with you on that.
That would be great, because we here at UNU-FLORES, we have the resource nexus in the core of our work. We want to make the planet better, but also people getting involved, and businesses. I'm a business researcher by background. So thank you very much for this interview, and for sure we will continue our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The best. Bye-bye.